The Pitt Panthers are the 2021 ACC Coastal Division champions. Pitt clinches the Coastal Crown with a 48-38 victory over Virginia. And man, that was a game that Pitt almost messed it up. That was a game that Virginia seemed like they could not even steal if you gave it to them. And a game that was entertaining for sure. This is your Pitt Postgame show here. I'm Mike Asti. And again, Pitt picks up that 9th win of the year, this one over Virginia, and they will be in the ACC Championship Game. Their opponent still to be announced. I will be joined by Ray Porter Jr. from Urban Media Today to return here to our Pitt Postgame show. And Ray, Pitt, they won this game. They end up with a 10-point victory, but it was a 3-point game throughout most of the second half, certainly in the fourth quarter. Pickett left the game. There was a while there was concern whether or not he would return. He did throw a couple interceptions in this game. He put up the numbers again, 300 plus, the 4 TDs between him and Addison. Addison really probably player of this game with his 200 plus yards as a receiver.
Absolutely.
Big plays after big plays from him, kind of bailing Pickett out even late in the game. Wasn't Pickett's best day, but the numbers were still there. I guess, how did Pitt end up with this victory, and how did it end up in a situation that it was so close? I mean, yeah, Virginia had their starter, but this was a 14.5-point spread in favor of Pitt, and Virginia for a while certainly could have picked up this victory. So how did this game shake out to be what it ended up being?
You know, I think about the movie Rocky IV that came out in 1985. I was 13 years old, and I remember watching it in the theater. Of course, it was Rocky versus Ivan Drago, and the 15th round is what this game reminded me of. And in the 15th round, they both, Rocky and Drago, was just hitting each other left and right. And I remember the broadcaster said, "This is just a street fight. It's a question of who wants it most." And I really believe that this fight for the ACC Coastal Division title was really a question of who wanted it most. And for Pitt, it's just a reminder of the fact that if you want it bad enough, then show how bad you want it. And it just showed Pitt's toughness and resolve that they did not lose, even in the midst of those interceptions, even in the midst of missed scoring opportunities, because they could have scored more touchdowns. I mean, those field goals, they could have been touchdowns. And even when Virginia just continued to drive down the field, I mean, what a game by the quarterback. Quarterback, you can see why they wanted him to play, and that why he wanted to play, because he lit up Pitt. He lit up their secondary and scored touchdowns. And even after all that, Virginia gave them their best shot, and Pitt still stood and prevailed. So for that, I say that was championship ball.
That ended up being championship ball. Yeah, Pitt found a way, and that's how you do it as a champion. Virginia almost found a way. They kind of gave up their discovery of that way towards the end. Brennan Armstrong, who was questionable most of this week for this game, a rib injury after last week, felt like he wouldn't even be able to be at his best if he did go. We actually talked on our preview show and morning show and every show you can imagine talking about this game that, you know, when you have a rib injury as a quarterback, that's going to hurt you throwing. You're going to be wincing every single pass. It's going to be an issue. Didn't look like it, though. Didn't look like it, really. 36 for 49, 487, 3 TDs a pick. You could argue he actually outperformed Pickett, even though his team did not win. Pickett ended up with 26 for 41, 340, 4 TDs, and 2 picks. And one of Armstrong's picks, his only pick of the game, actually, was just throwing it up there at the end of the half. So it's barely even an interception at that. A great performance by him, especially not being 100%. It was a quarterback matchup. It was a quarterback duel. It was a championship fight between the QBs. Not so much the defenses, though. Kind of knew what you were going to get from Virginia's defense. The reason why they had lost 4 games prior to this, and this being their 5th loss, is because the defense hadn't been good enough all year. Pitt's hiccups, their 2 losses to keep them out of the playoff conversation against Western Michigan and Miami, they were bad efforts from the defense. What was the problem here in this game defensively? Was it just that Armstrong and his offense was too much to handle? This was a great quarterback they were facing. Because Pitt actually got better defensively the last couple of weeks, and then once again in a big game they turn around and don't really show up to the effectiveness that Pitt needed, and it almost cost them in this.
I have to agree. I think it was really not not putting the pressure on Armstrong like they really should have. I mean, they did get to him several times, I'll say that, but then those times in which they didn't, and those receivers, in addition to Thompson, number 99, I don't know where they got him from, but Keaton Thompson had over 100 yards and 10 catches, and their other receivers also caught some passes that were just incredible.
Yeah, so, Wicks also got 144. They had 2 over 100, right? Right,
incredible. So I think that it was really Armstrong's quick release, and he basically got to the receivers and really challenged the secondary, Pitt's secondary. And that's going to be a thing that the Panthers really have to keep an eye on and make these adjustments in these final 3 games, because none of them are going to be easy. Obviously, the ACC Championship Game is not going to be easy. Right. And then whoever they play in the ball, and of course Syracuse. You don't want to sleep Syracuse in the final game. So he was able to shoot and put the ball on Pitt's secondary. Right. He quite simple.
He put it on him, yeah. I think he made himself some money in terms of some scouts and some and people at the next level. Yeah, Armstrong had one hell of a game, especially not at 100%. Kenny Pickett, of course, had a great game. I don't know if his best effort, but Addison bailed him out there at the end. It's still a solid game with 340 on the yardage for Kenny Pickett as well, who maybe still has a chance of being a Heisman finalist. Certainly thought he deserved it most of this season, but that's going to be a question mark that Pitt fans will be watching out for. But they'll also be watching their team, the ACC Championship Game. They will have Syracuse first, as you mentioned. That won't matter, though. They're going to be there as the Coastal Champion regardless. Ray Porter Jr. here of Urban Media Today. Mike Asti here on our Pitt postgame show. Pitt does win the Coastal 48-38. So Pitt gets that victory over Virginia, the 9th win of the year. Pat Narduzzi, Mark Whipple, Kenny Pickett, they all kind of quiet the doubters of most of this season. Now, in this game, Kenny Pickett did have a couple interceptions. He did have some kind of questionable moments towards the end. We've seen Pickett be a little bit more careless with the football down the stretch of this year, even though the yards and the incredible numbers are still there overall with the 340 passing yards. How would you evaluate Pickett's performance in this game? 26 of 41, 340 again, 4 touchdowns, but 202 and 4 TDs with 14 catches to Addison, who has really stepped up to be a beast. Pickett's incredible, but if you take Addison out of this equation, this is certainly going to be a problem. How would you say Pickett played in this? It doesn't feel like his best outing, but still obviously good enough.
I think in Pickett's case, it may not have been his best outing per se, but I also think about how he played against Western Michigan when he threw for 6 touchdowns and with 0 interceptions, and then also how he played in Miami against Miami when he passed for 519 yards. And of course, the end result of those games, they're pretty stats, but the end result was they lost both those games. In this game, throwing for 340, it's not too shabby. Throwing for 4 touchdowns, obviously, not too shabby. The interceptions, you don't want interceptions, you don't want turnovers, but there's a line from the late great John Facenda for NFL Films that says, yeah, I'm showing my age here, man. Great teams.
That's fine.
Great teams aren't always great. They're just great when they have to be. We can also say that about players too. Great players,
absolutely.
They're great when they have to be. And when Pickett had to be great, he was great. I mean, here's a perfect example. 2 4th down plays. I mean, the first 4th down, it is amazing how he scrambled out of that near sack and just found Addison in end zone. He could have had my recliner just sitting in the back of the end zone like that.
Yeah.
And then the second one again. The second one, he finds Addison again for the touchdown on 4th down. That, in my opinion, is an example of championship football. When you're doing whatever it takes to win. So that, because they could have easily settled for field goals on both of those drives, but they didn't. So he had a good game to me, and yeah, you want to eliminate the interceptions. I'm sure he wished he could get them back, especially that second one. It was when he was trying to find Jacques Louis and didn't see the safety. They were picking it off, and then the first one was a floater. Unfortunately, that one intended for Wayne. So you're gonna have your interceptions, but I think the key is how do you respond to it? How do you recover from it?
Right.
And I believe that Pickett, and then of course his injury. He did a Willis Reed move where he was out and then he came back into the game. So he played championship ball tonight, and he helped, along with Addison, help deliver Pitt the trophy. And I'm very proud of him.
Yeah, and you're going to have that curtain call moment potentially live for years and years and years, especially if Pitt caps off with the ACC title there. That curtain call at the end after the big touchdown score to Addison. I mean, that was perfect. That was certainly caps off Pickett's career at Heinz Field and certainly going on to the next level. Some projecting him in the first round, some saying top 10. Who knows? Mel Kiper has him number 1 on his board as QBs. I had a whole show on that separately that we'll have here on the channel. Certainly Pickett's made himself some money this year, but also helped this team to have a very special year, as Ray's saying, that Pitt does win the ACC Coastal Division, and they are going to be in the ACC Championship Game. This is your Pitt Postgame show. Ray Porter Jr. there of Urban Media Today. Now, I think also what was a big help to Pitt, and has kind of been an underrated help at times to Pitt, is the running game.
Right.
Yes. 100 yards for Vincent Davis, Hammond Jr. at 66. That's a big deal. And early on in this game, in the first half, they really weren't able to run the ball as much as you're seeing with these overall numbers. What allowed Pitt to eventually get that running game going? And, you know, for me, it really shows something for Pitt's offense, and it shows how successful Pitt's offense can be when they do get the running game going and when they stay with the run, because that certainly can help Pickett through the air as well.
Right. I think the key is capitalizing on basically wearing out Virginia's defense. They took advantage of it in the second half especially. I mean, look at Vincent Davis, technically in his final home game. Or wait, I think he's a junior. I'll take that back. He ended up with over 100 yards rushing. And then you also had Hammond. And Hammond, honestly,
he's a junior.
He's a junior.
Yeah.
And then Hammond, the freshman, I mean, they bring him into the second half. They should just call him the second half weapon. Coming in and getting yards, coming in with fresh legs. And then Abanaconda in the earlier part of the game as well. So to be able to have those options and to not have to worry about wearing out just one running back, that's priceless and valuable. And I think that helped wear out Virginia's run defense because they accumulated chunk yards. I mean, look at the touchdown from Hammond. I mean, that he is like, 5'9", about 170 pounds?
Right.
But he got the heart of Jerome Bettis the way he ran, the heart of Earl Campbell, the heart of John Riggins, you know, so he rumbled in. So I think that was the advantage because even if it is a shootout, you got to have a running game. If you're trying to play championship ball, you got to run the ball.
Yeah.
And no matter how many touchdowns Kenny Pickett throws, you got to have that running game so you can offset the defense. So Pitt was able to use it more effectively. And truthfully, they probably could have used the running game a little bit more on one of those final drives that ended up in a field goal.
Yeah.
And if they would have done that, Pitt would have been in the 50s easily. So they did a good job utilizing the run today.
Yeah, and I think it's been an underrated thing all year. I mean, Pitt started off the year with pretty much no running game. They didn't have really a running game last year. They haven't really had that featured back since James Conner, and maybe still don't because it's kind of been a mixed bag of Vincent Davis and Hammond most of this season, with one stepping up one week and one another stepping up another week. But still, having the running game, having someone as a 100-yard rusher, and they could have actually went to it more down the stretch. Right. I do want to get your thoughts here before we unpack this even further. At the end of the game, you saw a little bit controversy over a targeting call that is going to now trickle down into the game against Syracuse.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts there? Was that targeting for you? It looked like an unnecessary hit maybe, but it didn't look like fully crown of the helmet. No. It's one of those questionable situations in terms of targeting, but it was unnecessary at that point. Pitt already had a 10-point lead that ended up being the deciding factor. It was less than 2 minutes. Yeah, Virginia scores really quickly, but if they did score, they wouldn't then need to recover an onside kick. It was likely already a Pitt victory, and then you see that. Just what are your thoughts on that targeting call there at the end? We got to talk.
Yeah, it's so iffy. I mean, it's easy, and the Pitt fans completely had a fit. I was surprised, and I'm talking about both targeting calls. Even Servacio Dennis is a call on the first after the first 3 plays on the first drive. I mean, it's one thing if a player is intentionally wanting to just inflict anything on a player and leading with the crown of your helmet. But I honestly believe both plays were momentum, especially the second one, the one that you're referring to. The player went after the receiver. I mean, not after the receiver, but he was coming, to defend the ball, to knock the ball away, and the ball was suspended in the air. So I don't agree that it was targeting. I think that the referees got to do the job, and they got to make the best decisions, even if they're not popular, especially in front of the home crowd.
Yeah, that was. I'm sure. I mean, that I could feel the ire, especially that kind of popped the balloon a little bit of celebrating. Pitt fans felt like they had the win secured, but then to see his reaction, and at the end of the game, again, it was unnecessary at that point. But again, every game has had questionable targeting calls all year. It almost seems like across
every
the
game.
country. You're going to have the call. I don't think you can get rid of it altogether. We've seen too many intentional, just really egregious hits over the years for them to get rid of it altogether, especially in this day and age. But there has to be some separation of intent or not. Something of at least having the 15-yarder and then having that not be a suspension or vice versa. There got to be differences, I would feel, in targeting that I clearly it's not going anywhere. It's definitely not going anywhere. Ray, I do want to get your thoughts here because Pitt has Syracuse next, but again, that doesn't really matter for Pitt's season, even though you want to win that. You don't want to sleep on them and you want to end the season strong. That's on the road.
Right.
Pitt's capped off their home season. They get a win over Virginia. Pitt now 9 wins on the year, and they are the Coastal champs. This gets them into the ACC title game. Their opponent, though, is yet to be determined. Clemson beats Wake Forest today. That certainly opens up the map now for it potentially to be a rematch between Pitt and Clemson. Pitt could be there. Wake Forest could be there. The rematch between Pitt and Clemson is an intriguing possibility because Clemson's playing better now than they were entering that game. And offensively, they're playing better now than they were in that game. This would be a different Clemson team that would be very hungry to prove a point to Pitt that they still own the conference if they would beat Pitt despite what happened earlier in the year. Out of the potential options for Pitt in the ACC Championship game, because that's what everyone's going to be thinking about right now, even next week, who do you think is the most favorable opponent that Pitt could face? And then which opponent do you think would pose the biggest problem? Because even though this is a special year, Pitt gets in the ACC title game, you win a division. Pitt did this before under Narduzzi, and they just got completely trounced in that game. For Pitt to complete it being a special year and remember this for years and years, despite the individual performance of Pickett, for it to go beyond that, Pitt's going to have to cap it off and win the ACC, which they could do with this offense and Pickett. But which opponent would trip them up the most, cause them the most problems, and which opponent do you think will be the most favorable out of the options for Pitt still in that ACC title game?
I think more favorable would be, I still believe it's going to be Wake Forest. I mean, they've pretty much ran almost wire to wire.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate that they fell to North Carolina, which was a very, 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 very tight game.
You want offense, there you go, yeah.
Right, that's for sure. But I think that, it goes without saying that they know that they don't want this opportunity to slip out of their hands. And they're going to do whatever it takes to clinch the Atlantic Coast Conference. The ACC Atlantic Division. So I believe that they're still going to be favorable. Clemson is a dark horse, and like you said, they have something to prove to show that they're not done yet. And for them to make these improvements and strike back after that Pitt loss, so it just goes to show you can't count them out. It reminds me of certain teams that are just so used to rolling as a dynasty or so used to winning so much, and you're thinking they're done, but it's like, no, they're not done yet. So I think that teams in that division need to watch out for Clemson. So I think Clemson would be the biggest challenge to Pitt because, like you said, if they end up winning the division, they're going to be ready for a rematch. Now, I think Pitt will be ready for them, but they're still going to be the biggest challenge because they know Pitt compared to Wake Forest, compared to North Carolina State.
I do think Wake Forest will be potentially the most favorable matchup just because defensively they've been mostly, average to bad, allowing 50-plus points to North Carolina. They lose 58-55. They can score. Right. They can score right up there with anybody, but they've been floundering a little bit offensively in recent weeks. You mentioned the losses. You mentioned this loss to Clemson. And defensively, they've not even been – Pitt, when Pitt's been bad defensively, Wake Forest has still been worse. Maybe North Carolina State as well. I do think for sure Clemson would be the toughest matchup. I don't care who's on that roster. That's still a lot of five-star kids. To beat them twice in a year would be really difficult. This is a Clemson team that is much better than the team that Pitt did beat, even though this isn't Clemson of years ago or a national championship contender. They're not going to be in the playoff, obviously. They're not a ranked team. But this is a Clemson team that just beat number 10 in the country, Wake Forest. This probably would crawl Clemson back into the rankings. Clemson now has 8 wins on the year, only one less than Pitt. They've only lost 3 times. They beat Pitt. They got the conference. They got the same record. They kind of retooled and got revenge and redid the entire year. And ever since the Pitt game, where Clemson lost 27-17, Clemson has won every game to that point. They beat Florida State, Louisville, Connecticut, and then this win over Wake Forest, which is only the team they faced, but it is a great team nonetheless, and they're scoring a lot more. So, Ray, I definitely appreciate the time Pitt does get the Coastal Division Championship. They'll be in the ACC title game. They got Syracuse first. Ray Porter Jr., Urban Media Today. Ray, thanks for the time. I know you got more of your coverage to take care of, so I'll let you go. And we'll be talking again soon. I'll see you in the Hind Box as Steelers game coming up as well.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mike. It was a pleasure to be invited back onto this show. Such a great opportunity and such a great time talking with you.
Absolutely. Again, that one, Ray Porter Jr. of Urban Media Today joining me. He had joined me earlier in the season, so happy to have him back. I love those old school quotes. Didn't want to let him know that I wasn't born in 85 when he threw out that one comparison, but I know a lot of those old school quotes, and those do fit perfectly. This was a championship slugfest, really, between two great quarterbacks that are both going to be at the next level. They're both going to have their opportunities in the NFL. Certainly Pickett, who's made himself a bag this year, and Addison bails him out at the end. He still had a great game despite the 2 picks. Armstrong, an even better game with 400 plus, even though he was not at 100%. You almost feel for the kid losing with that effort. But Virginia's defense is a little worse than Pitt's. I do think Wake Forest, NC State, any of those opportunities for the ACC title game, their defense would be a little worse than Pitt's, and Pitt's offense would be too much to beat those teams. Pitt's offense would be a little better, and even if their offense can hang with them, like, say, Wake has proven, defensively would be worse than what Pitt could do. I think Pitt would be favored in those matchups. But Clemson, as Ray and I were talking about, is a different team, a different animal. They get a top 10 victory now, 8 wins for them. They're looking to be ranked now. Not a special year for Clemson, but if they win the conference, it kind of makes it something for them. They would want revenge. They're better than who Pitt faced months ago, and they haven't lost since facing the Panthers. They've also scored since facing the Panthers. Prior to the game against Pitt, I believe they only had 1 game all year, and it was not even to an FBS opponent with 20-plus points on the board, only 17 against Pitt. They've had 20-plus in every one of those games since Pitt. They found something on offense there that's finally clicking down the stretch of this year. It would be a different team that Pitt would be facing, but nonetheless, Pitt is in that ACC title game. They are the Coastal Division champions. I don't think anybody, even with Kenny Pickett coming back, thought this was going to be the case entering this season. So Pat Narduzzi quiets his doubters. He's certainly going to continue on. Mark Whipple's getting recognition all over the country and vying for awards as he deserves. Many blamed the offensive issues on him in the past. And Kenny Pickett, who finally finds some continuity, soars up Pitt's all-time statistical ladder, ends up as the career leader. And we're talking passing yards and getting over Dan Marino in touchdowns, single season passing record over Rod Rutherford. Just an explanation point and an incredible career for Kenny Pickett as he proves his doubters wrong as well. And again, Kenny Pickett is great. Not his best day, but great, certainly good enough. Pitt has proven themselves this year, but needs to finish the job. There's pressure to still finish the job. Pitt has been at this point before. They did win the Coastal before, despite not 9 wins on the year. This is the first time under Narduzzi Pitt gets to 9. Not as good of a Pitt team as this one. But if Pitt does not win it and finish the job and win the ACC, is it all for naught? How much you're going to wear a T-shirt and a hat for a division championship? Not even every major conference has divisions. Not always 1 versus 2 for a major championship in a major conference when you have divisions. It doesn't allow it to always be the first versus the second. Pitt's certainly one of those teams, though, that deserves to be there. No one's saying they don't. Win division or not, Pitt deserves to be in the ACC title game, and I'm glad they're there. But they got to win it. They got to win it. There's pressure to now win it. And if you face Clemson again, that is going to be a tougher opponent, but certainly likely Wake Forest, NC State is possible. Who knows? But I will tell you that Pitt, and it did. I actually didn't see the score yet. So if NC State won, that game finished. So NC State won. Clemson would have been rough, though. But again, Clemson has that loss to NC State earlier in the year. I'm aware of that, so that does take them out. Wake Forest can score. I'll tell you that. They can score. Defensively, they're a little worse than Pitt. So, again, who knows? This is instant reaction, by the way. This isn't an archive show. That's why you have this interaction as we go. But anyway, Pitt does get the win. They're in the ACC title game. Reason to celebrate if you're a Pitt fan, but you got to finish the job. And that'll do it for this edition of Pittsburgh Postgame here on Pittsburgh Sports Live. Pitt does get the ACC Coastal Division Championship over Virginia, beating Virginia, and they now are in that ACC title game. Pitt needs to finish the job, or is it all for naught?